The billionaire mounted his Ducati Panigale until a call revealed the truth about his ex and a baby. Before we begin, write in the comments which city you are following this story from. And when you're done, leave your rating from 0 to 10. Oh, and don't forget to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, enjoy every detail. Rowan Caldwell adjusted the leather jacket against the cool October evening air, his fingers tracing the familiar texture as he stood in the silence of his private garage. At 33, he had perfected the art of motion, always moving forward, always avoiding the stillness that invited unwanted thoughts. The Ducati Panigale gleamed under the soft overhead lights, its black frame reflecting his restless energy. He was tall, 6'3", with broad shoulders that carried the weight of billion-dollar decisions with practiced ease. His dark hair, perfectly styled but slightly tousled from the day, caught the light as he reached for the helmet. Sharp green eyes, the kind that had closed more deals than most people attempted in a lifetime, focused on the simple ritual of preparing to ride. It was his escape, his reset button when the walls of boardrooms and penthouse offices felt too confining. The phone vibrated against his chest, muffled by the Italian leather. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. Evening rides were sacred. No interruptions, no emergencies that couldn't wait until morning. But something about the persistence of the buzz made him pause. He pulled the device from his inner pocket without checking the screen. Rowan Caldwell. "You don't know me." The voice was feminine, steady, with an underlying tension that immediately commanded his attention. "But I thought it was unfair that you didn't know." Rowan's hand tightened around the phone. In his world, anonymous calls meant lawsuits, hostile takeovers, or journalists fishing for scandals. He'd learned to navigate them all with careful neutrality. "I'm sorry. Who is this?" "That doesn't matter right now." The woman's voice carried a weight that made him step away from the motorcycle. "What matters is that the woman you were with, Evelyn Hart, she has a baby. He's 6 months old." The garage seemed to shrink around him. Evelyn. Her name hit him like cold water, bringing with it the memory of honey-colored hair that caught sunlight, warm brown eyes that saw through his carefully constructed walls, and a laugh that used to fill the spaces between his words. She was 31, beautiful in a way that didn't try too hard, natural, genuine, with a voice soft enough to make him lean closer during conversations. They had been together for 8 months. 8 months of her trying to find space in his schedule, of him promising next week and after this deal closes. She had worked as a freelance graphic designer, her small apartment filled with plants and artwork, a stark contrast to his minimalist penthouse. When it ended 15 months ago, there had been no dramatic fight, no slammed doors, just her tired acceptance that she needed more than his maybe someday. "I don't understand." His voice came out rougher than intended. "She would have told me." "Would she?" The question hung in the air. "You ended things because you weren't ready for anything serious. Why would she come to you with the most serious thing of all?" Rowan sank onto the leather seat of the Ducati, the helmet forgotten in his hands. "Who are you? How do you know this?" "I'm someone who thinks a child deserves to have a father who knows he exists." The line went quiet for a moment. "She lives in the same apartment, Rowan. The one with the yellow door you used to joke about. She's raising your son alone because she's too proud to ask for help from someone who made it clear that family wasn't in his plans." The call ended. Rowan stared at the silent phone, his reflection distorted in its black screen. The garage, which moments before had felt like freedom, now felt like a prison. He thought of Evelyn's hands, delicate but strong, the way she used to sketch absent-mindedly while they watched movies, the way she'd look at him when he checked emails during dinner, not with anger but with a sadness that made him feel smaller than any business failure ever had. A son, 6 months old enough to smile, to recognize voices, to wonder where the other half of his world might be. He stood up slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. The Ducati, his symbol of independence and escape, now seemed like exactly what it was, a beautiful way to run from responsibility. He walked to the phone mounted on the garage wall and dialed a number he hadn't called in 15 months but somehow still remembered perfectly. It rang 3 times before her voicemail picked up, her voice unchanged and achingly familiar. "You've reached Evelyn. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." "Evelyn, it's Rowan." He cleared his throat, the words feeling foreign and essential all at once. Someone called me tonight about us, He couldn't say the words. "Please call me back. Please." He hung up and leaned against the wall, the cool concrete grounding him in a reality that had shifted completely in the span of a 5-minute phone call. Tomorrow, he would need to face whatever came next. Tonight, he needed to figure out how to be the man he should have been 15 months ago. Outside, the October wind rattled the garage door, and for the first time in years, Rowan Caldwell had nowhere to run. What would you do if you discovered that running from love had cost you everything that truly mattered? Evelyn Hart sat in the corner of her living room, the soft glow of the table lamp casting gentle shadows across the cream-colored walls. The apartment hadn't changed much since Rowan had last been there. Same vintage furniture she'd collected over the years, same watercolor paintings she'd created during art school, same yellow front door that he used to tease her about. But everything felt different now. At 31, she had learned to find beauty in small spaces. Her hair, a warm chestnut brown that fell just past her shoulders, was pulled back in a loose ponytail, strands framing her face as she bent over her laptop. She wore an oversized sweater in soft gray, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows as she worked on a logo design for a small bakery. Freelance work had become her lifeline, flexible enough to accommodate the unpredictable schedule of new motherhood, stable enough to pay rent and buy groceries. The baby monitor crackled softly beside her, transmitting the peaceful sounds of 6-month-old sleep. Noah. She had named him Noah because she needed something that felt like a promise, like dry land after a flood, like hope after devastation. He had Rowan's dark hair, already thick and unruly, and her brown eyes that seemed to take in everything with quiet curiosity. Her phone buzzed against the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a number she hadn't seen in 15 months, but would recognize anywhere. She stared at it for 3 rings before letting it go to voicemail, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the ceramic mug of chamomile tea that had gone cold hours ago. When the voicemail notification appeared, she closed her laptop and pulled her knees to her chest. She had imagined this moment countless times, what she would say, how she would feel, whether she would be angry or relieved or heartbroken all over again. She had practiced conversations in her head during late-night feedings, rehearsed explanations while folding tiny clothes, prepared herself for the possibility that he might never know. But she had also hoped he wouldn't find out like this. The message was short, his voice strained in a way she remembered from the night they broke up. When he said, "about us," she could hear the careful distance he was trying to maintain, the way he always stepped back when emotions got too close to the surface. When he couldn't finish the sentence about Noah, her heart clenched with the familiar ache of loving someone who couldn't say what mattered most. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the quiet street where she had built a life that didn't include him, the corner market where she bought Noah's formula, the small park where she took him on sunny afternoons, the coffee shop where other mothers gathered and talked about sleep schedules and pediatrician visits. It was a good life, not the one she had planned, but one filled with purpose and unexpected joy. The truth was, she hadn't told him because she knew exactly what would happen. Rowan would have insisted on doing the right thing, would have offered money and support and visits scheduled around his business trips. He would have treated their son like a responsibility to be managed rather than a miracle to be cherished. And she had already spent 8 months loving a man who saw her the same way. Noah stirred in the nursery, making the soft sounds that meant he would be awake soon. She moved toward the kitchen, warming a bottle with practiced efficiency while her mind raced through possibilities. She could call him back, could explain everything in the controlled, rational way that he preferred. She could invite him over, let him meet his son in the safety of familiar surroundings, or she could continue the silence, protect the peace she had built from the chaos of wanting someone who couldn't fully want her back. But as she tested the formula against her wrist, she realized that the choice wasn't really hers anymore. Someone else had made it for them both. The baby monitor crackled to life with Noah's gentle fussing. She smiled despite the turmoil in her chest. He was always hungry at exactly 8:30, as predictable as his father had been unpredictable. She walked toward the nursery, bottle in hand, preparing to hold the most important thing in her world, while deciding whether to let his father back into theirs. Outside, she heard the distant sound of a motorcycle engine, and her breath caught for just a moment before logic reminded her that half the men in the city rode bikes. But her heart knew better. Her heart knew that some sounds, like some loves, never quite left you alone. Rowan stood outside the familiar building for 20 minutes before finding the courage to climb the stairs. The yellow door looked exactly the same, cheerful and welcoming in a way that had once made him uncomfortable. He had always preferred the sleek neutrals of his penthouse, the safety of surfaces that didn't demand emotional investment. But now, staring at that door, he remembered how it had felt like coming home. He had texted her that morning, brief and careful. "I'd like to see you. Today, if possible. I understand if you need time." Her response came 3 hours later. 2 p.m. "Please don't bring anything." That last line had stopped him cold. In his world, every meeting came with offerings, contracts, gifts, gestures designed to smooth negotiations. But Evelyn had always been different. She had never wanted his money or the things it could buy. She had wanted his time, his presence, his willingness to be vulnerable, things he had convinced himself he couldn't afford to give. Now, standing in the hallway outside her apartment, he realized how much that refusal had cost them both. He knocked softly, 3 gentle taps that wouldn't wake a sleeping baby. The door opened, and there she was. 15 months had changed her in subtle ways. Her face was thinner, with delicate lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and new responsibilities. She wore jeans and a cream-colored blouse, her hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the graceful line of her neck. She was still beautiful, more beautiful somehow, in a way that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with the quiet strength that radiated from her. "Hello, Rowan?" Her voice was steady, but he caught the slight tremor underneath. "Evelyn." He had rehearsed a dozen opening lines during the drive over, but they all disappeared when he looked at her. "You look tired?" She stepped aside to let him enter, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That's honest, at least. The apartment was exactly as he remembered, but smaller somehow. A bassinet sat near the couch, toys scattered on the coffee table, a high chair positioned by the kitchen window. The evidence of a life he had never imagined, built in spaces where he used to exist. "Is he—" Rowan's voice caught. "Is he here?" Evelyn nodded toward the bedroom. "He's napping. He usually sleeps for another hour." She moved to the kitchen, putting distance between them. "Would you like coffee?" "Please." He remained standing, afraid that sitting would make this conversation too comfortable, too much like the afternoons they used to share. "Evelyn, I need you to know that I had no idea. If I had known—" "What?" She turned to face him, her brown eyes direct and unflinching. "What would you have done differently?" The question hung between them like a challenge. He wanted to say he would have stayed, would have been there for every doctor's appointment and late-night feeding, but they both knew that wasn't true. 15 months ago, he had been the same man who checked emails during dinner, who postponed conversations about the future, who treated love like a luxury he couldn't quite afford. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I would have tried." She poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, the same ones they used to share on Sunday mornings. "I didn't tell you because I knew you would try. And trying isn't the same as wanting, Rowan. I couldn't raise a child with someone who was there out of obligation." The words hit him like physical blows, each one true and devastating. "And now, everything is different." She handed him the coffee, their fingers brushing for just a moment. "He's not a concept anymore, or a possibility. He's a person, with needs and feelings and a future that doesn't depend on whether you're ready for it." A soft cry came from the bedroom, followed by the contented babbling of a baby waking up from a nap. Evelyn set down her mug and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Do you want to meet your son?" The question stole his breath. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about what mattered, about what he was capable of feeling, condensed into this single moment. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Evelyn disappeared into the bedroom and returned carrying a child who looked impossibly small in her arms. Dark hair, serious brown eyes, tiny hands that reached toward his mother's face with complete trust. He was beautiful in a way that transcended description, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. "Noah," Evelyn said softly, "this is your daddy." The word hit Rowan like lightning. Daddy. Not father, not biological parent, not legal guardian. Daddy. The kind of word that came with bedtime stories and scraped knees and unconditional love. The kind of word that changed everything. Rowan stared at the small face, looking up at him with curious brown eyes, his hands frozen at his sides. Noah seemed impossibly fragile, yet completely present in a way that made the rest of the world feel distant and unimportant. The baby's tiny fingers opened and closed around nothing, as if reaching for something he couldn't yet understand. "You can hold him," Evelyn said gently, though her protective instincts were clearly warring with the desire to give father and son this moment. Support his head and neck. Rowan had negotiated billion-dollar mergers with steady hands, had signed contracts that affected thousands of lives without a tremor. But as Evelyn carefully transferred Noah into his arms, he felt like he was holding the entire universe. The baby was warm and solid, heavier than expected, but still so small that Rowan was afraid to breathe too deeply. Noah settled against his chest with surprising ease, one tiny fist pressing against Rowan's heart through the fabric of his navy sweater. The simplicity of that contact, skin seeking skin, warmth finding warmth, undid something fundamental inside him. Rowan's voice broke completely. He cleared his throat and tried again. He's perfect. Evelyn sat on the edge of the couch, watching them both with an expression that mixed wonder and caution. He has your stubborn streak. When he wants something, he makes it very clear. She smiled softly. And your eyes when you're thinking. He gets this little furrow between his eyebrows. As if summoned by her words, Noah's face scrunched in concentration as he studied his father's face. Rowan felt tears he didn't expect. Emotions he had spent a lifetime learning to control spilling over without permission. This child, his son, had been breathing and growing and becoming a person for 6 months without him. 6 months of first smiles and sleepless nights, of small discoveries and daily miracles that he would never get back. Does he? Rowan swallowed hard. Does he sleep through the night? Evelyn laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her since he arrived. Sometimes. When he does, I wake up anyway, just to make sure he's still breathing. The pediatrician says that's normal for new mothers. She paused. I don't know what's normal for new fathers. The word hit him again. Father. Not the distant theoretical concept he had been avoiding, but an actual role, a relationship that existed whether he claimed it or not. Noah shifted in his arms, making a soft sound that was part contentment, part curiosity. Without thinking, Rowan began to rock gently, a motion that felt both foreign and completely natural. He likes that, Evelyn observed quietly. Motion calms him down. Maybe he got that from you too. Rowan thought of all the times he had chosen movement over stillness, speed over contemplation, his motorcycle rides, his restless pacing during phone calls, his inability to sit quietly without distraction. Had he passed that need for motion to his son? What else had he unknowingly given him? I used to imagine, Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper, what it would be like if you were here, not just visiting, but really here, for the 3 a.m. feedings and the doctor appointments and the days when nothing works and he won't stop crying. She looked down at her hands. I told myself it was better that you weren't, because I knew you would have tried to fix everything instead of just being present for it. Noah yawned, a tiny, perfect yawn that made Rowan's chest tight with unfamiliar tenderness. Maybe I would have, he admitted, but maybe I could have learned to be different. People don't change overnight, Rowan, especially not for reasons that feel like pressure instead of choice. He looked at her then, really looked. The exhaustion around her eyes, the way her shoulders carried tension she was trying to hide, the strength in her voice that came from months of handling everything alone. She had grown into motherhood the way she had approached everything else, with grace and determination and no room for self-pity. What do you need? He asked suddenly. Right now, today, what do you need that I can actually provide? The question surprised her. In their previous relationship, his offers of help had always come with conditions, timelines, his own agenda. This felt different, more like surrender than negotiation. I need to know that if you're going to be part of his life, you won't disappear when it gets complicated. Because it will get complicated, Rowan. Children don't run on business schedules. Noah's breathing had deepened against his chest, the trusting weight of sleep making Rowan acutely aware of how much this small person would need from him. Not just money or visits, but presence, consistency, the kind of love that showed up even when it wasn't convenient. For the first time in his adult life, Rowan Caldwell was holding something more valuable than everything else he owned. 3 weeks had passed since that first afternoon, and Rowan found himself navigating a world where his usual tools, money, influence, efficiency, meant nothing. He had started showing up unannounced, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with coffee and an awkward willingness to help with whatever needed doing. This Thursday morning was no different. He stood in Evelyn's kitchen, holding Noah while she attempted to eat breakfast with one hand. The baby had been fussy since dawn, and dark circles under her eyes told the story of another sleepless night. Rowan had arrived to find her still in pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun that somehow made her more beautiful than any evening gown ever had. He's been like this since 4 a.m., she said, spooning yogurt while Noah gripped Rowan's finger with surprising strength. The pediatrician says it's normal, but normal doesn't make it easier. Rowan shifted the baby to his other arm, the movement now more natural after weeks of practice. What usually helps? Sometimes walking helps. Sometimes nothing helps. Evelyn's voice carried the particular exhaustion of new motherhood, bone-deep tiredness mixed with fierce protectiveness. Yesterday, he calmed down when I played classical music. Today, he cried through an entire Mozart concerto. Noah began to fuss again. The soft whimpering that Rowan had learned was a prelude to serious crying. Without thinking, he began to pace the small kitchen, humming under his breath, a random melody he didn't recognize but that seemed to flow naturally. The baby's protests quieted. "Where did that come from?" Evelyn asked, pausing mid-bite. Rowan stopped humming, suddenly self-conscious. "I don't know. I've never—" He looked down at Noah, who was watching him with bright, alert eyes. "I guess I just thought he might like it. He does. Look at him." Noah's tiny fist had uncurled, his body relaxed against Rowan's chest. The tension that had kept him rigid and uncomfortable had melted away, replaced by the drowsy contentment that every new parent learned to treasure. "You're getting good at this," Evelyn said softly. The praise should have felt like a victory, but instead it highlighted everything he was still getting wrong. Like yesterday, when he'd tried to help with laundry and shrunk her favorite sweater, or Tuesday, when he'd attempted to assemble a new high chair and ended up with extra screws and wobbly legs, or the disaster of last weekend, when he'd offered to babysit while she ran errands and Noah had cried for 2 solid hours because Rowan had forgotten to warm the bottle. "I'm terrible at this," he admitted, continuing his gentle pacing. "Yesterday I couldn't figure out why he kept crying, and it turned out I had put his diaper on backwards." Evelyn laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her in weeks. "Welcome to parenthood. Last month I tried to put him in the car seat upside down, twice. But you're his mother. It's supposed to be natural for you." "Says who?" She set down her spoon and looked at him directly. "There's no parenting gene that activates when a baby is born, Rowan. We're all just figuring it out as we go." Noah had fallen asleep in his arms, the peaceful weight of complete trust. Rowan moved carefully to the living room and settled into the rocking chair Evelyn had inherited from her grandmother. The morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting everything in a soft golden glow that made the moment feel suspended in time. Evelyn followed, carrying her coffee mug and settling on the couch where she could watch them both. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What changed? Not just finding out about Noah, but you. 3 weeks ago, you could barely hold him without looking like you might drop him. Now you're humming lullabies and he falls asleep in your arms." Rowan considered the question while watching Noah's tiny chest rise and fall. "I think," he said slowly, "I spent so long being afraid of not being good enough that I never tried to actually be good. With work, I could control the variables. With this," he gestured gently at the sleeping baby, "there are no variables to control, just moments to show up for. And the showing up is enough? Sometimes." He met her eyes across the small room. "Sometimes it has to be." Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Children walking to school, neighbors retrieving morning papers, the everyday rhythm of life continuing around them. But inside this apartment, time moved differently, slower, more intentionally. Like everything that mattered could fit in this single room, this single moment of a sleeping baby, and 2 people learning to trust each other again. Rowan realized he had stopped looking for the exit. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Rowan's phone buzzed against the nightstand of his penthouse bedroom, dragging him from the first deep sleep he'd had in weeks. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen, and his heart immediately jumped to the worst possible scenarios. "Evelyn, what's wrong?" Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "I need you to come. Now. Noah has a fever and I can't get it down, and the pediatrician's office won't open for hours, and I don't know if I should take him to the emergency room or—" "I'm on my way." He was already reaching for clothes, the phone pressed between his ear and shoulder. "How high is the fever?" 102.3. It was 101 an hour ago. Her voice cracked. "Rowan, I'm scared. He's so little and he feels like he's burning up and I don't know what to do." "You're doing everything right. Keep him comfortable, keep checking his temperature. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He broke every speed limit getting to her apartment, his mind racing through fragments of parenting websites he'd been secretly reading at work. Fever in infants. When to worry, when to wait, when to rush to the hospital. The information blurred together, useless against the raw fear that his son might be seriously ill. Evelyn opened the door before he could knock, her face pale and streaked with tears. She wore an old robe over pajamas, her hair pulled back messily, and she had never looked more beautiful or more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, leading him quickly to the nursery. Noah lay in his crib, flushed and restless, making small, whimpering sounds that cut straight through Rowan's chest. His usually bright eyes were glassy with fever, and his tiny body radiated heat even from a distance. "When did it start?" Rowan kept his voice low and steady, though everything inside him wanted to panic. "Around midnight. He was fussy during dinner, but I thought he was just overtired." Evelyn hovered near the crib, her hands fluttering uselessly. "I've given him infant acetaminophen. I've tried cooling him down with a lukewarm bath. I've called the nurse hotline twice." "Evelyn," he touched her arm gently, "you're doing everything right. But what if I'm not?" The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. "What if I'm missing something? What if he gets worse? I'm supposed to protect him, and I don't even know if this is serious or normal or—" "Hey." Rowan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "We're going to figure this out together. Right now, what does your gut tell you?" She looked at Noah, then back at him, tears spilling over. "That he needs a doctor. That I can't wait until morning. Then we go to the emergency room, now." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of fluorescent waiting rooms and worried whispers. Noah cried fitfully in Evelyn's arms while they filled out paperwork, his fever climbing despite the medication. Rowan found himself making phone calls to his assistant, rearranging meetings he couldn't even remember scheduling, clearing his entire week without a second thought. When they finally saw the pediatric resident, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, the diagnosis was both relief and exhaustion. Viral infection, common in infants, nothing serious but uncomfortable for everyone involved. Fever reducers, plenty of fluids, and time. "He'll be cranky for a few days," the doctor explained. "But this will pass. You did the right thing bringing him in." By the time they returned to Evelyn's apartment, dawn was breaking over the city. Noah had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep in his car seat, his fever beginning to break. Rowan carried him inside while Evelyn moved like she was walking through water, depleted in every possible way. "I should make coffee," she said automatically, standing in the middle of her living room like she'd forgotten where she was. "You should sleep," Rowan said gently, settling Noah in his crib. "I'll stay, make sure he's okay." She turned to look at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she didn't argue. "You have work tomorrow. Today. Whatever day this is. Work can wait." The words came out with a certainty that surprised them both. "This is more important." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of trust. "You don't have to stay. I want to." He realized as he said it that it was completely true. "I want to be here." She nodded slowly, then disappeared into her bedroom. Rowan settled into the rocking chair beside Noah's crib, watching the steady rise and fall of his son's breathing. Outside, the city was waking up, traffic building, people starting their days, the world continuing its relentless forward motion. But inside this quiet nursery, time felt different, protective, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what mattered most. For the first time in his life, Rowan Caldwell understood the difference between being needed and being necessary. Rowan woke to the soft sound of Evelyn moving around the kitchen, the familiar clink of ceramic mugs and the gentle hiss of the coffee maker. Sunlight streamed through the nursery window, and he realized he had fallen asleep in the rocking chair, his neck stiff from the awkward angle. Noah was still sleeping peacefully, his fever finally broken, tiny fist curled against his cheek. The past 18 hours felt like a lifetime. Somewhere between the panic of the emergency room and the relief of dawn, something fundamental had shifted between them. Not just the crisis they had navigated together, but the way they had moved as a team, anticipating each other's needs, sharing the weight of worry, trusting each other with their deepest fears. "Good morning." Evelyn appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups of coffee, her voice still hushed to protect Noah's sleep. She had changed into jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. The exhaustion was still there around her eyes, but underneath it was something that looked like peace. "How long was I out?" Rowan stood carefully, accepting the coffee with grateful hands. The ceramic was warm against his palms, grounding him in the domestic simplicity of the moment. "About 3 hours. You were talking in your sleep." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Something about quarterly reports and baby bottles." He laughed softly, surprised by how natural it felt. "My subconscious is having an identity crisis." They moved to the living room, settling on opposite ends of the couch with the baby monitor between them. Outside, the neighborhood was fully awake. Children playing in the small park across the street, neighbors walking dogs, the gentle rhythm of a Thursday morning. But inside the apartment, everything felt suspended in the golden quiet that followed crisis. "Thank you," Evelyn said suddenly, her fingers wrapped around her mug. "For last night, for staying, for dropping everything to come here. You don't have to thank me for taking care of my son, don't I?" She looked at him directly, her brown eyes serious. 3 months ago, if someone had told me you would spend the night in a hospital waiting room and then sleep in a nursery chair, I would have said they were crazy. Rowan considered this, thinking of the man he had been before Noah, always moving, always planning the next deal, treating relationships like items on a to-do list. Maybe they would have been right. 3 months ago. What changed? He thought about it while watching steam rise from his coffee. "I think I finally understood the difference between having something in my life and actually being present for it. I spent years accumulating experiences instead of living them." The baby monitor crackled with soft sounds as Noah began to stir. They both looked toward the nursery, and Evelyn started to rise, but Rowan touched her arm gently. "Let me," he said. "You haven't slept properly in 2 days." She settled back into the couch cushions, and he realized it was the first time she had let him take the lead without hesitation. Trust, he thought. This is what trust looked like. Noah was awake but content, lying on his back and studying the mobile above his crib. His fever was completely gone, leaving behind a baby who seemed more alert and engaged than usual, as if the crisis had somehow accelerated his awareness of the world around him. "Good morning, buddy," Rowan said softly, lifting his son from the crib. "Feeling better?" Noah made soft, babbling sounds, his tiny hands reaching up to touch Rowan's face with curious fingers. The gesture was so trusting, so completely open, that it took Rowan's breath away. This child had been sick and frightened, surrounded by strangers in a sterile hospital, and yet he still reached toward his father with complete faith. "He likes you," Evelyn said from the doorway, her voice warm with something that might have been affection. "How can you tell? The way he relaxes when you hold him, the way he watches your face when you talk." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the faint vanilla scent of her shampoo. "He knows you're his daddy." The word still hit him like lightning, but now it carried warmth instead of terror. Daddy. The man who showed up in the middle of the night, who rearranged his entire life around a baby's needs, who found purpose in something smaller and more important than any business deal. "Can I tell you something?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anything. Last night, watching you with him in the hospital, I realized something I've been afraid to admit." Rowan turned to look at her, Noah contentedly babbling between them. "What's that?" "I missed you. Not just for Noah, but for me. I missed having someone to share this with, someone who cares about him as much as I do." She paused, vulnerability flickering across her features. "I missed us." The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and honest and full of possibility. Rowan felt something settle in his chest, not the desperate urgency of passion, but the steady warmth of coming home. "I missed us too," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to say it." Noah reached up and grabbed a handful of Rowan's hair, tugging with surprising strength and making them both laugh. In that moment, surrounded by morning light and the comfortable chaos of family, Rowan understood that some kinds of love didn't announce themselves with fireworks. Sometimes they just quietly rearranged everything that mattered. 2 months had passed in a rhythm that felt almost natural. Dinners together, bedtime routines shared, mornings that began with Noah's laughter instead of alarm clocks. Rowan had started keeping clothes in Evelyn's dresser, his toothbrush beside hers in the small bathroom. Small concessions to a life that was slowly merging without anyone officially acknowledging it. But on this gray November afternoon, as rain streaked the windows and Noah napped in his crib, the careful peace they had built felt fragile. Evelyn sat at her laptop, working on a logo design while Rowan reviewed contracts on the couch. The domestic scene should have been comfortable, but tension had been building all week. Small moments of friction that neither wanted to name. The way he checked his phone during Noah's feeding time. The way she went quiet when he mentioned a business trip to Chicago. The careful politeness that had crept back into their conversations. "The Hendersons want to meet for dinner tomorrow," Rowan said without looking up from his papers. "The couple from the country club. I mentioned we might be available." Evelyn's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "We? I thought—" He finally looked at her, noting the careful neutrality in her expression. I thought it might be nice for you to meet some people, expand your social circle. Your social circle, you mean? The correction hung between them, precise and cutting. Rowan set down his contracts, recognizing the shift in her voice, the tone that meant they were about to have a conversation he'd been dreading. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Evelyn closed her laptop and turned to face him fully. Because it sounds like you're trying to integrate me into your world, the way you always did. Dinners with the right people, conversations about the right topics, making sure I fit into the spaces you've already decided are appropriate. Evelyn, that's not, isn't it? Her voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with 18 months of carefully controlled emotion. Just like you used to invite me to those corporate events where I spent the evening smiling at people who asked what I did for work and looked disappointed when I said graphic design instead of investment banking. Rowan felt the familiar frustration rising, the urge to defend himself against accusations that felt both unfair and uncomfortably accurate. I never asked you to be anyone but yourself. You never had to ask. You just expected me to want the same things you wanted, to be excited about the same social circles, the same restaurants, the same weekend plans. She stood up, pacing to the window where rain blurred the view of the street below. And when I wasn't, when I wanted quiet dinners at home or walks in the park instead of networking events, you made me feel like I was being difficult. That's not how I remember it. She turned back to him, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tight with recognition. Do you remember the night we broke up? What you said when I asked if you could see a future with me? He did remember. The panic that had seized him when she'd asked about marriage, about children, about building something permanent together. The way he'd talked about timing and career goals and someday when things settle down. The careful distance he'd put in his voice to avoid hurting her while still protecting himself. You said maybe when my schedule clears up. Her voice was soft now, but each word landed like a physical blow. Like love was a meeting you could reschedule when it was more convenient. I was scared, he admitted, the words coming out rougher than intended. I didn't know how to want something and risk losing it at the same time. And now? What's different now? The question caught him off guard because he'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks. What was different? Noah, obviously. The undeniable reality of fatherhood had changed everything. But was that enough? Was his love for his son enough foundation for the kind of partnership Evelyn deserved? I don't know, he said finally, and the honesty felt like stepping off a cliff. I know I want to be here. I know I want to be the kind of man who shows up consistently, not just in crisis. But I also know that wanting something and being capable of it aren't the same thing. Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller and more vulnerable than he'd seen her since that first night with Noah. I can't do this again, Rowan. I can't build a life around someone who's still figuring out if he wants to be in it. That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? Because it feels like you're playing house with us while keeping one foot out the door. Your penthouse still looks exactly the same. Your life still revolves around your schedule. You're here when it's convenient, when Noah needs you, when I'm falling apart. But where are you when everything is fine? When it's just ordinary Tuesday and nothing dramatic is happening? The accusation hit him because it carried truth he hadn't wanted to examine. He was here for the big moments, the crises, the times when his presence felt essential. But the quiet Tuesday evenings, the mundane grocery shopping, the simple act of choosing to be present when nothing required it, those were the spaces where he still held back. From the nursery came the soft sound of Noah waking from his nap, and they both looked toward the door with the automatic response of parents. But neither moved, the weight of unfinished conversation holding them in place. I need to know, Evelyn said quietly, if you're here because you love us, or because you love the idea of being the kind of man who doesn't abandon his family. The question cut straight through every defense he'd built, every careful rationalization. Because the truth was, he wasn't entirely sure he knew the difference. Noah's soft crying from the nursery broke the silence, but neither Rowan nor Evelyn moved immediately. They stood frozen in the weight of her question, the rain outside providing a steady backdrop to the conversation that was reshaping everything between them. Finally, Evelyn went to get Noah, returning with their son in her arms. The baby was alert and content, seemingly unaware of the tension that filled the room. She sat in the rocking chair, settling Noah against her shoulder with the practiced ease of 8 months of motherhood. You want an honest answer, Rowan said, his voice rougher than intended. I don't know the difference anymore. I don't know where obligation ends and love begins, and that terrifies me. Evelyn looked up from Noah's face, her expression unreadable. At least you're being honest. I've spent my entire adult life measuring success by what I could control, what I could achieve, what I could build. Rowan moved to the window, staring out at the gray afternoon. And then you happened, and Noah happened, and suddenly success meant showing up for things I couldn't control, being present for moments I couldn't schedule. That's not love, Rowan. That's adaptation. The words stung because they were true. He turned back to face her, seeing the woman who had always seen through his carefully constructed explanations to the truth underneath. You're right, he said quietly. I adapted. I learned to be what you needed, what Noah needed. But somewhere in all that learning, he stopped, the words catching in his throat. What? I stopped being myself. Or maybe I realized I didn't know who that was without the deals and the schedules and the constant forward motion. He sat down heavily on the couch, the weight of self-recognition settling over him. I love Noah. That much I know with absolute certainty. But you? Us? I don't know if what I feel is love or just the desperate need to not be the kind of man who abandons his family. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in gentle circles on Noah's back. When she spoke, her voice was steady but tired. Do you know what I realized during those 15 months after we broke up? Tell me. That I was so busy trying to be the right woman for you, easygoing enough, understanding enough, independent enough, that I lost track of what I actually needed. She looked down at Noah, who had dozed off against her shoulder. I convinced myself that love meant accepting whatever scraps of attention and commitment someone was willing to offer. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know, but intent doesn't erase impact. She met his eyes across the small room. And when Noah was born, when I was sitting in that hospital room alone, I promised myself I would never teach my son that love is something you have to earn by being less than you are. The words hit him like physical blows, each one carrying the weight of 18 months of careful consideration. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we both need to figure out who we are separately before we can know if we work together. Her voice broke slightly on the words, but she continued. I'm saying that Noah deserves parents who love each other because they choose to, not because circumstances forced them together. Rowan felt something crumbling inside his chest, not just the fragile relationship they had been rebuilding, but his entire understanding of what he thought he wanted. Are you asking me to leave? I'm asking you to be honest about what you're staying for. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, but her voice remained steady. Because if you're here out of duty, if you're loving us because it's the right thing to do rather than because you can't imagine being anywhere else, then yes, I'm asking you to leave. Evelyn, no. She stood up carefully, Noah still sleeping in her arms. Don't decide right now. Don't give me an answer based on panic or guilt or the fear of looking like a bad person. She walked toward the nursery, then stopped at the doorway. Go home, Rowan. To your real home. To your real life. Spend some time remembering who you were before all this, and then decide if that person genuinely wants what we're offering. And if I decide I do? She turned back to him, and the sadness in her eyes was deeper than anything he'd ever seen. Then come back and tell me why. Not because Noah needs a father, not because I need help, not because it's what a good man would do. Tell me you're choosing this life because it's the one that makes you feel most like yourself. She disappeared into the nursery, leaving Rowan alone in the living room with the rain and the growing darkness and the terrible clarity of everything he'd been avoiding. He looked around the apartment that had become more familiar than his penthouse, at the coffee mug Evelyn had been using, at Noah's toys scattered across the floor, at the comfortable chaos of a life built around love rather than efficiency. For the first time in months, he didn't know where he belonged. He gathered his jacket and keys, leaving quietly so as not to wake Noah. As he stood outside the yellow door that had once felt like coming home, Rowan realized that the hardest part wasn't knowing what he wanted. It was knowing that what he wanted might not be enough. 3 weeks had passed since Rowan walked out of Evelyn's apartment, and his penthouse had never felt more like a prison. The floor-to-ceiling windows that once made him feel powerful now only emphasized how removed he was from real life. The minimalist furniture, the expensive art, the carefully curated emptiness, it all felt like a monument to a man he was no longer sure he wanted to be. He hadn't contacted Evelyn, though he'd picked up his phone 100 times. She had asked for honesty, for him to remember who he was before Noah, before her, before the weight of fatherhood had forced him to examine every assumption he'd built his life on. The man he'd been before was sitting at his mahogany desk at 11 p.m. on a Friday night, reviewing acquisition papers that would make him another $100 million. The man he'd been before measured his worth in market shares and industry respect, found satisfaction in the smooth precision of deals closed and competitors outmaneuvered. But now, staring at contracts that had once energized him, Rowan felt nothing but emptiness. His phone rang, breaking the silence of the penthouse. Evelyn's name appeared on the screen, and his heart stopped. "Rowan?" Her voice was strained, urgent. "I'm sorry to call so late, but Noah's been asking for you." "Asking for me?" He keeps saying "Dada" and looking toward the door. He's been fussy for days, and nothing calms him down. She paused, and he could hear Noah crying in the background. "I know you need space to figure things out, but I'm coming over." "Rowan, you don't have to." "I'm coming over," he repeated, already reaching for his keys. "Right now." The drive to her apartment took 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. With every mile, every traffic light, every turn toward the life he'd been avoiding, something shifted inside him. Not the desperate panic of crisis, not the guilty obligation of duty, but something cleaner and more certain. He was going toward the people who made him feel most like himself. Evelyn opened the door before he could knock, Noah in her arms, both of them looking exhausted. But when Noah saw Rowan, his crying stopped immediately. The baby reached toward him with both arms, making the soft sounds that Rowan had learned meant contentment and recognition. "Hey, buddy," Rowan whispered, taking his son into his arms. Noah settled against his chest with a sigh that seemed to release all the tension in the small apartment. "I missed you too." Evelyn watched them both, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He wouldn't sleep, wouldn't eat properly. It was like he knew something was wrong. Rowan began the gentle rocking motion that had become second nature, humming the wordless melody that always calmed Noah down. Within minutes, the baby's breathing had deepened into sleep. "I know who I was before," Rowan said quietly, not wanting to wake Noah but needing Evelyn to hear this. "I was a man who convinced himself that success meant never needing anyone. I built walls so high that I couldn't see over them anymore." Evelyn remained by the door, as if afraid to come closer. "And now? Now I know that the best version of myself, the person I am when I stop trying to control everything, only exists when I'm with you and Noah." He looked at her directly, holding nothing back. "I'm not here because I have to be. I'm not staying because it's the right thing to do. I'm here because this is where I belong. Rowan, let me finish." Noah stirred slightly and Rowan adjusted his hold automatically. "I went back to my old life. I sat in that penthouse, worked those late nights, made those deals, and I felt like I was watching someone else's life through glass. Everything that used to matter felt hollow." He moved closer to where she stood, close enough to see the hope and fear warring in her expression. "I love you, Evelyn. Not because you're Noah's mother, not because I should, but because you see who I really am underneath all the things I thought I had to be. You make me want to be better. Not different, better." Tears spilled over her cheeks. "I love you too. I never stopped loving you. But love isn't enough if I can't choose it freely. I know." He shifted Noah to one arm and reached for her hand with the other. "That's what I'm doing. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing us. Not out of obligation or guilt or fear, but because I can't imagine wanting anything else." She stepped into the circle of his free arm, and for the first time in 3 weeks, Rowan felt complete. The three of them standing together in the soft light of her living room, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a real life. "Are you sure?" she whispered against his shoulder. "I've never been more sure of anything." He pressed his lips to the top of her head, breathing in the familiar vanilla scent of her hair. "I want to wake up here tomorrow morning. I want to argue about whose turn it is to change diapers.
I want to worry about Noah's first steps and his first words, and whether he'll like the same books we read to him." Evelyn pulled back to look at him, searching his face for any trace of the uncertainty that had defined their relationship before. "And your penthouse? Your perfectly controlled life? I'll sell it. Buy something here, in this neighborhood where Noah can walk to school and we can have dinner with neighbors, and you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not."
He smiled, surprising himself with how natural the words felt. "I want an ordinary life with extraordinary people." Noah made a soft sound in his sleep, and they both looked down at him with the automatic focus of parents. In his small face, they could see hints of the man he would become, shaped by the love they chose to give him every ordinary day. "Welcome home," Evelyn said softly, and Rowan knew she wasn't just talking about the apartment. She was talking about the life they were choosing to build together. 2 years later, the yellow door had been repainted twice since that November evening when everything changed, but Evelyn still smiled every time she came home to it. Today, it bore the sticky fingerprints of a 2.5-year-old who had discovered the joy of touching everything at his eye level, and she wouldn't have it any other way. She pushed open the door to find controlled chaos. Noah's toys scattered across the living room floor, the scent of something burning slightly in the kitchen, and the sound of Rowan's voice reading from a children's book with the kind of dramatic inflection that made their son giggle uncontrollably. And then the dragon said, "I'm not scary, I'm just misunderstood." Rowan's voice boomed from the nursery, now transformed into a toddler's bedroom, complete with a small bed shaped like a race car and walls covered in Noah's artwork. "Dada funny." Noah's voice bubbled with laughter, followed by the sound of small feet running toward the living room. "Mama, Dada dragon!" Noah appeared in the doorway, his dark hair tousled and his brown eyes bright with the exhaustion that came just before bedtime. He wore dinosaur pajamas that were already too small. He was growing so fast that Evelyn had learned to buy clothes 2 sizes ahead. "Was Daddy being a silly dragon again?" she asked, scooping him up for a hug that smelled of baby shampoo and the cookies they'd baked together that afternoon. Rowan emerged from the bedroom, his hair equally tousled, wearing jeans and the old MIT t-shirt that had become his uniform for weekend evenings at home. At 35, he moved with the easy confidence of a man who had found his place in the world, no longer the restless energy of someone always planning his next escape, but the settled strength of someone who had chosen to stay. "In my defense," he said, wrapping his arms around both of them, "the book says the dragon is misunderstood. I was just giving him the voice he deserved." Evelyn laughed, the sound filling the small house they had bought 6 months ago, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a yard where Noah could play, and neighbors who borrowed sugar and invited them to barbecues. It was nothing like Rowan's former penthouse, and everything like the life they had built together. "How was the meeting?" she asked, settling Noah on the couch between them. "Good. Strange, but good." Rowan had started a consulting firm focused on sustainable business practices, working with companies that prioritized social impact over pure profit. It paid a fraction of what his investments had earned, but he woke up every morning excited about the work. "I had lunch with Marcus, remember him from the old firm? And he kept asking when I was coming back to real business." "What did you tell him?" "That I finally figured out what real business is." He looked around the living room, at the family photos covering the mantel, at Noah's art projects taped to the refrigerator, at the comfortable furniture that prioritized function over aesthetics. "It's investing in something that grows more valuable with time instead of something you can sell for profit." Noah was fighting sleep, his head heavy against Rowan's shoulder, but his eyes determined to stay open for whatever interesting thing might happen next. This was their favorite time of day, after dinner and before bedtime, when the 3 of them could simply exist together without agenda or schedule. "Tell me about your day," Rowan said, his hand finding Evelyn's across Noah's small body. She told him about the new client who wanted a complete brand redesign, about Noah's insistence on helping with grocery shopping by putting random items in the cart, about the neighbor who had stopped by with vegetables from her garden. Simple things, ordinary moments that had somehow become the foundation of everything that mattered. "I keep thinking," Evelyn said quietly, "about that night you left, when I asked you to figure out who you were without us. And I think I needed to figure out who I was too. Not just Noah's mother, not just the woman who loved you, but someone who could stand on her own and choose to share her life rather than need someone else to complete it." Rowan considered this while watching Noah's breathing deepen toward sleep. "Do you think we would have found our way back to each other eventually? Without the crisis? Without Noah getting sick? Without all the drama?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe. Or maybe we needed to break a little to learn how to fit together properly." Noah had finally surrendered to sleep, his small body completely relaxed between his parents. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rise and fall of his chest, marveling as they did every evening at the miracle of this small person they had created together. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into evening, porch lights coming on, families finishing dinner, children being called inside, the kind of ordinary suburban rhythm that Rowan had once found suffocating and now found deeply peaceful. "Do you ever miss it?" Evelyn asked. "The excitement, the deals, the feeling of controlling everything?" Rowan thought about it seriously, as he always did when she asked difficult questions. "I miss the clarity of it sometimes, the simple math of profit and loss, but I don't miss the emptiness. He shifted carefully so Noah could sleep more comfortably. I'd rather have complicated happiness than simple success. Later, after they had carried Noah to his room and tucked him in under his favorite blanket, they stood together in the doorway watching him sleep. 2.5 years old, with his father's stubborn chin and his mother's gentle spirit, completely unaware of how much love surrounded him. I used to worry, Evelyn whispered, that he would grow up wondering why his parents took so long to figure out how to love each other properly. And now I think maybe the best gift we can give him is showing him that love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling that happens to you. Rowan pulled her closer, his arms encircling her in the doorway of their son's room, in the house they had chosen together, in the life they were building one ordinary day at a time. Outside, the world continued its relentless motion. Stock markets and business deals and people chasing success that could be measured and counted. But inside this small house with the yellow door, time moved differently, more intentionally. Like everything that mattered could fit in these rooms, these moments, these choices to stay and love and build something real. The Ducati still sat in their garage, but these days it was covered in dust, used only for the occasional weekend ride when Noah wanted to see his daddy be fast and cool. Most evenings, Rowan preferred the slower pace of walking to the neighborhood park, Noah's small hand in his, Evelyn beside them pointing out flowers and clouds, and all the small wonders that made up a life worth living. They had learned that some kinds of love don't announce themselves with urgency or drama. Some kinds of love just quietly rearrange everything that matters, one ordinary day at a time, until you look up and realize you're exactly where you belong. If you had the choice between a life that looked successful from the outside and one that felt meaningful from within, which would you choose? And would you have the courage to give up everything you thought you wanted for everything you actually needed? Thanks for watching. Your feedback is very important to our work, so please leave a comment telling us what you think and where you are watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. Your participation is very important for the continuation of our work, so please share this story with anyone who would love it too.